Everyone, this is Mr. Honey, and today we're going to be going over family law, and this is going to be one of the final things that we discuss with talking about families. So we're going to have notes and then an assignment, and then we'll be continuing along with what we got going on for next week. All right, so today we're going to be talking about abuse and sexual misconduct as it relates to families. This can be a very, very touchy subject, so I just want to let you know that if this makes you feel uncomfortable, in any way, shape, or form, and you feel you need to talk to somebody, our guidance department is fantastic, and they will gladly allow for you to make an appointment and have this conversation. But once again, the reason I'm talking about this is because, once again, it is in the standards, and then also I want to discuss this stuff because if there's ever an event that you witness something and you want to intervene, you will know how to recognize some of these things. All right, so let's go ahead and continue. So, the first thing is, what is physical abuse? All right, now I have the law listed up here, and like I said, there's a lot of conversation in here about what physical abuse is. The big thing that I want you to pay attention to are these two aspects down here where you see physical injury. Physical abuse occurs when someone uses some form of either excessive punishment on the child to cause them physical or mental injury. And then with physical injury, typically if the child or if the act of excessive punishment or abuse results in death, permanent or temporary disfigurement to any bodily organ or function, that is typically what falls under physical abuse. So we're seeing bruises as a form of disfigurement, bodily organs or functions. Obviously, if you discipline a child to the point where they can't do certain things because their body has been damaged, that is considered physical abuse. And a lot of times, what you're seeing here is, for example, hitting, excessive discipline, kicking, punching, pushing, and even in some cases, burning. All right, so this is very, very sad, very, very very shocking in some cases. But we're going to continue on and discuss the difference between corporal punishment and capital punishment. Now, we have capital punishment, which is often thought of is like the death penalty. In other words, someone dying. If you think about it, you wear a cap on your head, chop off your head, you're going to die. So that is capital punishment. Corporal punishment is like spanking and things of that nature. Now, a lot of people don't understand what falls in line as corporal punishment. So, corporal punishment has to check off these boxes right here. So, first off, it's administered by a parent or a person in loco parentis. And loco parentis means in place of the parent, they are in charge. So, that's going to be the first thing. It is perpetrated for the sole purpose of restraining or correcting the child. In other words, the child is acting out, they're misbehaving and acting extremely, wild and disrespectful, and corporal punishment is used for that purpose of restraining or correcting them. So going around and, obviously hitting a child for no reason because you want to get back at them or because they're irritating you or you just want to punch kids. I don't want I don't think anybody should be doing that. Nobody should be doing that. But in certain cases, there are people who do that, and so once again, um, it's perpetrated for the sole purpose of restraining the child. And then finally, is reasonable in manner and moderate in degree. You shouldn't be losing, or you shouldn't be leaving bruises and causing bodily harm. Has not brought about permanent or lasting damage on the child. So, in other words, if somebody, if you try to punish a child as their parent and you end up breaking like bone or you end up causing like permanent disfigurement, that is considered beyond corporal punishment into abuse and is not reckless or grossly negligent in any behavior by the parent. So, in other words, you're not using corporal punishment all willy nilly and you're being reckless about it. Once again, it has to be in a manner and that is moderate in degree and then reasonable in manner. Emotional abuse. Mental injury states that the injury to the intellectual and psychological capacity of the child is evidenced by the discernible and substantial impairment of the child's ability to function. Long story short, what this means is that if you are being, for example, we have excessive verbal abuse, mind games, lying, not showing affection, not modeling proper emotional capacity to the point where the child does not show the ability to function well around other people. That is considered, for example, emotional abuse. And you can see this a lot of times in certain people. I have friends of mine who, for example, they've had relatives where their fathers would constantly, you know, act out in a manner that did not show proper emotional capacity, was constantly verbally abusive, and did not show any affection. And because of that, those children actually grew up with a fear of men. And where, that is the case in many cases. So a lot of times that constant lasting fear can often be attributed to the emotional abuse. Next, we have neglect, which is when a parent, guardian, or other parent responsible for the child's welfare fails to supply with adequate food, clothing, shelter, education, supervision, appropriation of the child's age and development. All right, so this is not providing food, not providing clothing, not providing water, not providing shelter, not taking the child to school, and then not supervising or ensuring the child's safety. So, for example, if a parent left a 4-year-old at home alone, that is a lot different than leaving a teenager at home alone. And that can be grounds for neglect because, once again, it has to be appropriate for the child's age and development. Other thing is, for example, not taking the child to school. So, in many cases, you are required by law to come to school. And many times, when people do not come to school, DSS can come knocking on the parent's door and ask, why are you not taking your child to school? Why is this not happening? And it's different if you have to go for like a family trip or you're going on, and the school knows what's going on. But if it's an example where you have not shown up to school for multiple days, or in many cases, you have students who refuse to come to school. So in that case, DSS can still come knocking on the parent's door and, start questioning and everything else. So it's one of those things like making sure that the child has what they have or the parent is working their hardest to provide that. A lot of times people think that, oh, well, if the child doesn't have food or doesn't have the clothing or whatever they need, because the parent can't provide it, but the parent is working their hardest to provide it. There's a difference. There is a difference. There's a difference between a parent who has to work in multiple jobs and try to make ends meet, but still is having issues providing these things versus a parent who just negligently does not provide at all. And I want to make that clear. Okay. And then finally, we have abandonment, which is willfully deserts or a child, willfully deserts a child, or willfully surrenders physical possession of the child without making adequate arrangements for the child's needs and continuing care. So, leaving a child somewhere, or not continuing any form of care. So, in many cases, if a parent secures like a legal guardianship for their child through grandparents, family, friends, and decides that they do not want to be a parent anymore, while most people feel that that is abandonment, it is not the case from South Carolina state law. Now, if a parent turns around and says, okay, we are going to just leave this child on someone's doorstep somewhere, that is considered abandonment. If a parent willingly leaves a child in a random park and says, oh, someone will pick them up, that is abandonment. If the parent chooses not to continue any form of care, that is considered abandonment. All right. So there is a difference. And a lot of people may feel abandoned because, their parents may have given them up for adoption or had them live with someone else. But the true definition outside of feelings, the true definition by law is making sure that abandonment falls into the line if someone is not ensuring care for the child, and having that squared away. So now we're going to be moving into sexual abuse. All right, now this is when a parent, guardian, or other person responsible for the child's welfare commits or allows to be committed against a child a sexual offense or engages in acts or omissions. So, in other words, what this means is you have straight up sexual abuse where, for example, you have child molestation. All right. And then from there, you have what that is considered touching in inappropriate areas for sexual pleasure. All right. It's a lot different. For example, if a child says that, their private parts hurts and you ask, well, can I see them to make sure that you're okay? And then making sure that the child is okay versus if you ask a child to take their pants off and then you're asking them to touch or you're touching them in inappropriate areas for an adult's own pleasure. All right, that is where it draws the line. Okay, because as a parent, and as any case, there may be instances where a child may feel uncomfortable in their private areas, and you will need to check to make sure that they are okay. And if they are, and if you are doing this not as a means of making sure that they are okay and checking on their welfare, but rather doing that for one's own sexual pleasure, that is where we end up in the world of sexual abuse. Another thing is that there's also considered non-touching activities. So, for example, a parent showing their genitalia to a child at a child's very young age willingly, parents performing sexual acts in front of children. For example, we also have parents showing pornography to a child is also considered sexual abuse as means of non-touching activities. And then also owning child pornography. Once again, this is considered to a degree sexual abuse, even if the child is not your own, but owning pornography of your own child is considered that standpoint of sexual abuse. And then also, if you look into the law up here, it says engages in acts or omissions. And what that basically means from this standpoint is you willingly know that sexual abuse is occurring and you fail to report it, you can be held just as liable. So, for example, if a child basically, so let's say you're like the uncle or something, and your nephew comes up to you and says that their dad is sexually abusing them, and you do not report it, you can be held just as liable for that as the father should that come out. All right. So just want to make sure that you guys are aware of that. Sexual misconduct with a minor. This is basically with the age of consent in South Carolina, 16 years old, and consensual age of 15 or younger is considered statutory rape. All right. Now, we do have, for example, close in age laws, which are known as Romeo and Juliet laws, and those engaging in sexual activity who are close to age, for example, 18 and 15, 15 and 16, are most of the time protected from prosecution, but that is not always the case. The best advice that I would give you is if you are going to engage in any activity or thinking about engaging in any activity sexually, don't. Just don't. Wait till you're an adult and you can make those decisions on your own, but do not be making those kinds of decisions right now, and make sure that you are abstaining from any sort of sexual activity. So, South Carolina has certain protections. Once again, we're going to be delving more into that later. But once again, this is just one of those things that I'm telling you because there are instances where, for example, first off, if both participants engage in activity under the age of consent, they could both face prosecution. And then also, there are instances, for example, where you have babysitters. Who, example, if a babysitter is in charge, they are thought to be in loco parentis, in place of the parent. And there have been cases where babysitters or people who were of the age of consent have committed sexual misconduct acts against people who, for example, were under the age of consent. So in those cases, um, criminal misconduct charges will still apply, and in many cases, if not all of them, prosecution is going through, and those people will be jailed and accused of statutory rape. So it is one of those cases where, for example, even in families, even in families or people who act in loco parentis, there are cases where you have children who have seen acts of sex being played out, and they will enact them on other children. and things of that nature. And a lot of times, because of this happening, the law, especially when it comes to misconduct with a minor, will come into play. And then finally, we have, in some cases, a very, very touchy law, marital rape. Now, in what this basically is non-consensual or coerced sexual activity while in a marriage. All right, a lot of people think that, in many cases, marriage equals happiness, love, romantic, you love your partner, anytime you engage in sexual activity, it is done out of, love and showing your love for one another. But in cases, marital rape is not necessarily the case. For example, as we have here, marital rape is illegal in all 50 states. However, in South Carolina, for marital rape to be considered an actual assault and be charged and everything of that nature, marital rape can only be reported within 30 days after the assault. So if a husband, for example, rapes his wife, and commits sexual assault against his wife, and she reports it 2 months after the fact. Essentially, that case can get thrown out because it has to be reported within 30 days. So it never happened. And then also, it must be coupled with aggravated assault. So, in other words, physical force, weaponry, and threats. So, in other words, it's in the first or second degree of assault. So if it's in the third degree and rape occurs, it is not considered marital rape. So what's wrong with this law, and how could this affect the family unit? Essentially, it's a law that has very big holes in it. Because, for example, if a husband were to drug his wife, if a husband were to have his wife intoxicated and she was unable to give consent, essentially what would happen there is that that is not considered a physical force. No weaponry was involved and no threats were involved. So therefore, it's not considered marital rape. That is one of the things that is scary because, once again, there is a line drawn by the law that states that rape can exist, um, marital rape can exist, but only under these two stipulations. And this can be, messed up because in many cases, marital rape can still occur. A person may not have protection, and then protection under the law, and then also this can affect the family unit because, if that dynamic exists, a lot of times, this is not a good thing. So, for the assignment today, you are going to pick 2 articles on your own. Just Google like abuse and then like a state, and then look at news articles that you see. And you are going to pick 2 articles on your own that are related to family and neglectful abusive situations. And these events must take place outside of South Carolina. Instead, for each event, you're going to write the following. So for each article, a short 3 to 5 synopsis of what happened, what type of abuse occurred in this standpoint. So you could have abandonment, you could have sexual abuse, you can have physical abuse, all types. So what types of abuse occurred, and then your thoughts on the situation. So this is a reflection, and then a link to the article. So you go ahead and submit your little chart for notes, and then go ahead and take care of this 2 articles, and then we will continue with class tomorrow.